Do you think one mind is better than many? Neither do we. A University of Chicago Booth School of Business MBA is for curious and collaborative people who value different perspectives and ideas. Chicago Booth takes pride in empowering and being empowered by women of diverse backgrounds. We believe that fostering an inclusive community creates an environment of analytical, open-minded inquiry and produces knowledge with enduring impact. Learn more today at chicagobooth.edu/elevate. Welcome to the Ellevate podcast, conversations with women changing the face of business. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Ellevate podcast, History Makers. I am so excited to have you on today. You are going to love this interview. I just finished it up. It's with Allison Jaslow. She's the first woman and first openly gay CEO of the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. Such a great interview. We talk about Don't Ask, Don't Tell. We talk about the history and the updates that have happened for women in the armed services, which if you enjoyed my podcast back with Cynthia Ramirez, the first woman master gunner in the U.S. Army, we expand on that. We talk about what you can do to support veterans, and we talk about her being a bridge between the veteran and civilian community. It's such a great interview. You're going to love it. Let's go ahead and get to it right now. Hi, everybody. Today I have with me Allison Jaslow.
Thanks for having me on, Megan.
So I am so excited for multiple reasons. When we first read you off as a history maker on the podcast, at the end of the podcast, we just read you off as the first woman CEO. And then when I did a little more digging, I found out that you not only are the first openly gay CEO, which as a member of the LGBTQ community makes me so happy, you are the first openly gay individual to lead a major U.S. Veterans Service organization.
Yeah, it's correct. It's only been since the last a little over a decade that Don't Ask, Don't Tell has been repealed. So I think one of the most exciting things for me about being in this leadership position is that IAVA was also the only major veterans organization to actually support the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So I think it's a great thing for the organization to also be able to be in a position to elevate somebody who's openly gay into a leadership position. And so, yeah, it's kind of wild.
Yeah, it's one of those things where progress has been made so fast, but also it feels like you're like, hasn't it always been this way?
Yeah, and it's, you see the environment that we are operating in the country today too. And it's like with progress, there's also backlash and there's more progress yet to be made, So my hope is that, both leading an organization and doing the work that I'm doing, that I can be a part of the solution when it comes to like moving us forward, but also, with my own identity, being able to be a leader, maybe a symbol of hope for some people, people especially who, served in silence and never saw leaders that they thought that they could be themselves. That, we've come a long way in giving somebody, it's like the old adage, you can't be what you can't see, right? And I think that's caused challenges for women elevating into certain both leadership roles, but also in professions, but also for openly LGBTQ people.
Absolutely. And I was going to say, we can't hesitate to bring up how much the military has changed for women in the past few decades. I talked with Cynthia Ramirez, the first woman master gunner, recently on the podcast, who was amazing. But like she brought up how I think she was only the second class of people that were brought in and allowed to serve in, I believe, the main branches of the military.
Well, it sounds like she was maybe somebody who post the combat exclusion being lifted, because when I was deployed, I definitely was in the middle of combat, but by definition wasn't allowed to serve in a combat role or combat arms profession. So in the Army, it's like infantry, armor, field artillery. Women, because of that, couldn't go to ranger school, and you've seen women go to ranger school now, right? And I will say that like it's an interesting consequence of being at war for 2 decades with an all-volunteer military that actually was a catalyst for progress for women in the military. Because as a matter of principle, if we wanted to make sure that any able-bodied American saw the military as an attractive profession and was willing to volunteer to serve in it, and the stakes were that we were actually in war in Iraq and Afghanistan, um, it allowed us to have the conversation on a, like, of course we want every person to be able to serve in whatever capacity they want to, if we want to still have an all volunteer military that's healthy. And I think that allowed for not only very rapid progress for women in the military, but also I think was a catalyst for Don't Ask, Don't Tell repeal as well.
Absolutely. And thank you for catching on to what I was trying to say. I was trying to find the exact words that she had said to me, but I think you nailed it right there with it was after that restriction was lifted.
Yep, totally. Which that was only back in 2016.
Yeah.
The Pentagon announced it somewhere, I think in the middle of the Obama administration. It took a number of years as these things go, to study what the impacts might be and how do we roll it out correctly and think through all of the things. I think it was like a 3-year planning process that took place before the change was fully implemented. But yeah, now you're seeing some women in the military, like, I mean, we already knew these badasses existed out there, but they're getting an ability to prove themselves in new ways, and many women just really rising to the challenge. And hopefully at the end of the day, there are a number of women 4-star generals now, and some that are moving into some of the combatant commands. But, before women could serve in combat roles, I commonly characterized there being a iron ceiling in the military. I say that because the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is always somebody who has served in the combat arms, which makes a lot of sense given kind of the sort of the core purpose of the military. But that meant that, like, women basically didn't have a path to be the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. But that path is now, somebody's going to have to blaze a trail there. But that path is at least a viable path now.
Absolutely. That's actually, I had never thought of that. That not only that cutting off women's combat, abilities or uh, cuts off their ability to rise through various other ranks.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, there literally was an iron ceiling when it came to, like, the top leadership roles in the military for women. Like, literally, there's no way you would have seen a woman be a service branch chief or the chairman of the Joint Chiefs prior to allowing women to be able to serve in combat. I just don't think it would have been the case ever. So hopefully, it might take a generation for us to get our first woman chairman of the Joint Chiefs, but hopefully, it'll at least be something that I see in my lifetime now.
I would love that. And I will interview them on this podcast, let me tell you. So one thing we always like to ask our history makers, usually at the beginning, you alluded to it a little bit before, but the big question of how did you get to where you are today?
Oh, gosh. Well, being in the Army was my dream as a young person. When I was 13, I characterized myself as the only success story of career day that I know of. I went on a career day field trip that I actually didn't choose. I had chosen to go some other places, but took a bus ride over to Fort Myer, which is in Arlington, Virginia, and it's the military base that is connected to Arlington National Cemetery. And there was something about that trip, something about that base, which is very, I don't know what the right word is, but because of the ceremonial nature of the units that are there, lots of high ranking officials that are there, you can kind of feel that sort of like the pomp and circumstance of the military is more evident at Fort Myer than it is at other, bases where everybody's just training and, going about their day to day business. And I don't know, something about all of that really connected with what has been a deep desire to serve my country ever since. And because of that trip, the first way I envisioned doing so was being in the Army myself. So it was my goal from 8th grade on to be in the Army. At the time, the Army did not have its first 4-star general. So Allison Jaslow is the kind of person who aims high. And the goal wasn't just to be in the military and serve in the military, but to serve in the United States Army and be its first woman 4-star general. I'm actually happy to say that like somebody would have beaten me had I stayed in the military. I went to school on an ROTC scholarship, got sworn into the Army in 2004, served stateside in Colorado Springs, but spent a very little time in Colorado Springs because between 2004 and 2008, it was the height of both the Afghanistan and Iraq war. Both wars actually ended up surging at different points. But my first tour was about a year from 2004 to 2005. And then I was actually in Iraq for the Iraq surge, which was from the beginning of 2007 to like April of 2008. So I was there for 15 months. All of the active duty troops surged in a slightly different way, but for us active duty Army troops, most folks who were on ground during the surge served 15-month tours. It was during that deployment that I started to believe that maybe like serving in the Army for a career wasn't my true calling, if you will. That was in part because of some leadership disappointment that I saw around me, and I didn't think that I would get in a position to kind of change that or be the leader that I wanted fast enough, frankly. But I also wondered whether I could, instead of plodding along and working it up through the ranks in the military, if by chance, if I got out, that I could make a greater impact faster in a different context. So I made the decision to get out, and had also along the way in college, I was a political science major, fallen in love with the campaign side of politics, and had been drawn to kind of like communications as well. So when I got out, I started pursuing both roles on political campaigns, but also trying to work in political communications as well. So I worked on a campaign in 2008 when I got out. I worked in the White House supporting the communications director at the beginning of the Obama administration. I worked as a press secretary on both sides of Capitol Hill, and was largely working for members that also had like, the best way to describe it is they had tough re-elections. So in our politics, you have people who kind of have to fight for it every time, and then you have some people who just kind of get to walk in the door, and they don't have to because they've got such a slanted either district or state towards their political party. But one of the reasons why I give that context is because it is in my nature to want to kind of be in the consequential roles. So I wasn't just doing political communications. I was doing political communications where the stakes were really high because we wanted to make sure that the person who I was working for, like, brand was stewarded well, that their constituents knew that they were working hard for them, that I had a brain that would think about, how they were functioning in their official capacity, knowing that the stakes were really great for their reelection. After doing a few communications roles, I also then, like platoon leader Allison Jaslow, wanted to be in charge again, wanted to run something again. And so I found my way to managing a congressional race in Western Illinois. And it was one of the top races in the country, again, because I have either a knack for that, or I'm drawn towards the hardest, most consequential jobs. So I assumed the campaign manager role. I was actually a second campaign manager post-primary for a woman named Sherry Bustos, who was running in her first congressional race in the Quad Cities area of Illinois. Helped get her elected. It was a really, really tough race that I, at points, had no idea how I was going to pull it off. Like, I could see a path, but then it also was like one of those, it's like standing at the bottom of Pikes Peak. It's like you see a path, but wow, it's 13.1 miles all the way up there. Like, do I really have what it takes to climb all the way to the top? But when I got her reelected, I then had the great privilege to be her chief of staff. She asked me post reelection to go to Washington with her, be her chief of staff. It was incredibly fulfilling to be able to build a staff and a team, help her establish herself in Congress, help see her through her first reelection. And then after that point, the beginning of 2015 was when I started to be interested in shifting a little external myself, but also using my talents in a slightly different way. And that is what brought me to advocacy. There are lots of nonprofits out there in the world, but an advocacy nonprofit essentially, whether it's the League of Conservation Voters, the Human Rights Campaign, or the organization that I'm at now, Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, those organizations kind of like make their money understanding how to drive a conversation in the media and or through other means, like there's so much that happens in the digital space these days, for example, but to drive important conversations, to influence public opinion, and then also influence policy action. So essentially, like, I took a skill set where I tactically knew how to win campaigns, understanding of how certain pressures influence elected leaders, and took that kind of inside knowledge to the outside that helps me be effective doing the advocacy work that I do today. And so, long story short, fast forward to where we're at now, being CEO of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. I've at this point in my career built or rebuilt 4 multi-million-dollar organizations at this point. And so I think I bring to the role not only the core competencies that you need to actually run an organization and help it thrive, but I also bring, because we are an advocacy organization, a skill set to the role, and my personal identity as a member of the post 9/11 generation community of veterans, that allows me to strategically steer the organization to do effective advocacy into the future.
Absolutely. And yes, thank you so much for all of that. And just, I read a stat online that said that women veterans are one of the fastest growing groups within the veterans community. In 2000, they were projected to make up about 1 in 20 veterans, and then whereas by 2040, they're projected to make up about 1 in 5 veterans. So, is that, what has that change, meant in terms of, what you do, and how the military and the veterans community has changed?
Well, of course, a lot of this is driven by older generations dying off, in addition to more women serving, right? When you're talking about the larger veteran population, what I will say is, you know, us humans are complicated. And most humans, like, I'm an outlier. I actually am like pro personal growth. I'm always like pushing myself to develop and change. I'm sure a lot of your other podcast guests are similar, but the average person does not like change. And um, so not only has this demographic shift been disruptive to the veteran community, it happening so quickly, I think, has been a little bit of a shock to the system. And there's been a lot of change that's resisted. So, for example, to make women feel more included in a culture that has been largely male dominated um, for some time, it has been really hard to get both military culture and the culture at the VA to evolve to better support what is a growing population of women who are both serving and have become veterans. And so that's why, we've made incredible amount of progress in getting women the care that they need, which wasn't the case, you know, 6 years ago. This is actually my second tour at Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. When I was last at the organization, I helped launch our Women Veterans Initiative back then. We've made a lot of progress when it comes to getting women care at this point. There's still progress to be made, but huge strides in the services and support that they're getting from the VA specifically. But the culture is kind of like the long tail, dragging behind all of the progress that we all intellectually know we need, but haven't quite gotten yet. So even though that change is occurring, there is a lot of active culture change work that's going to continue to need to be done within what are two very large institutions. And for better or worse, even if women are going to be 1 in 5, we're still going to be a minority inside the larger veteran community and military community population, at least for the foreseeable future. And so their active culture change will have to take place, and active work will need to be done to sustain that, I believe, going forward, even if we make progress on that front.
Absolutely. And so one thing I want to ask is, I think people hear so much about, people who are currently in the military and our troops abroad and our troops at home. What can people at home do, I think, to support veterans, those who have finished their tours, who finished their service? What can they do to better help them? Is it giving to organizations? Is it, community activities? What can we do?
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to make a plug for any of your listeners to go to ieva.org and support the work that we're doing to support the post 9/11 generation of veterans. We are a vanguard veterans organization that operates at the national level, but also because of our generation, we're just much more forward thinking and envelope pushing than the other orgs that are out there. I think we're going to do a lot of we have already been at the forefront of a lot of the progress for our community of veterans to this point, and will continue to be. But, this might sound simple, but I think one of the most impactful things people can do is just have a conversation with us. Fewer than 1% of Americans are stepping up to serve these days, and have in the last, the post 9/11 wars that we were engaged in, which has caused uh, a divide between the American people and those who are, you know, taking a solemn oath to not just protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, but are willing to put their life on the line to go overseas wherever we ask them to protect us and make sure that threats don't come here at home. But more and more people don't know us. And I think that there's a lot of value in just like understanding us as humans, why we made the decision to serve, and on a deeper level than just, finding out that we're a veteran, thanking us for our service, and like moving on to the next thing. I mean, I think just having a conversation would be very appreciated by a lot of veterans, at least those who are willing to share about their experience too.
I love that. And that's something that anyone can do. I'm all
Yeah, and,
about,
and it's, there was a time when everybody's grandfather served, right? So most Americans had more familiarity with our community than they do today. And the only way I know how to fix that is either through my work, because part of advocacy work is storytelling. Like, how can I shed light on our community? Tell you about us, tell you about the women veterans experience or other veterans experience, and like try and put that out into the world so people can understand it. But the way that folks can do that also at the micro level is when you run into a veteran, just have a short conversation with them. I think it'll make an impact on their lives, and has a decent chance of making an impact on the person who initiates the conversation's life too.
absolutely. I love that. And I'm absolutely going to make sure to do that. So, one thing that we always like to finish out with all of our history makers is by asking, so if you're the first, you always want to make sure you're not the last. And we all stand on the shoulders of others who've made history before us. So, we always ask all of our history makers, who is a history maker who inspired you?
That's a really good question. This is later in my career, but because I've gotten a chance to see her operate up close, I'd say Nancy Pelosi. I know a lot of people have opinions about her, and frankly, I had some of those opinions before I got to see her effectiveness with my own two eyes. The first time I was on Capitol Hill was during when the Affordable Care Act was negotiated. And I know for a fact that the Affordable Care Act would not have passed had it not been for Nancy Pelosi. And she's generations ahead of me. And I can't even imagine what it was like for her to have to break through to where she made it. But I also don't think she would have made it to where she did if she wasn't also just so damn good. And to me, it's awe inspiring in a way where, like, we'll see what I do in the rest of my career, but like, I'm not sure, given what I've seen the demands of her job up close, or at least when she was Speaker of the House, like, I don't know if I could do it. I'm not a limited. I'm a person who lives life in many ways without limits, but it's like, it's really tough. She's really good. And like for her to have done it in her time, uh, getting a full appreciation for that up close has been very humbling, I think, to me. And at the same time, awe-inspiring.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people don't realize today, she was one of the first members of Congress who was openly advocating for the LGBTQ community during the AIDS crisis, going to marches, like I think people don't realize this history, she has made history so many times.
Totally. And she's unafraid to kind of like go there if she feels like something is the right thing to do, based on the role that she's signed herself up for. And I mean, she represented San Francisco as well. So it's, important for her to advocate on behalf of her constituents. And, San Francisco has long been a place for LGBTQ people to find community. But yeah, she's a trailblazer in just so many ways. And I think, we'll be talking for years about how there will never be anyone like her again, and we got to bear witness to it.
Absolutely agreed. And I still remember the day that the first, I think it was Bush's State of the Union address, in which he got to say for the first time, Madam Speaker, which I don't think I'll ever forget.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And she's also a good test case on like, is some of the ire that she has faced, is it gendered? Did we as a people, let's just call it, because there's just been so much focus around her, at least in our politics, for so long. Like, if she was a man, would she have drawn some of the criticism, some of the tongue-in-cheekness? Would she have become the character that she was in political ads? I don't know. I leave it to researchers and scientists to kind of make these judgments and whatnot, but it does make me scratch my head. And, hopefully in time, women will be judged, on equal footing as men. But I still think we have some progress to do in that regard. But I hope by the end of my lifetime, maybe we're there. We'll see.
Absolutely. Well, as we finish this out, I want to ask, is there anything else you want to say to our listeners at all?
No, I mean, I will just share gratitude with you. I'm not the only vet that you've had on your podcast, it sounds like. And to my earlier point about just bridging the civilian military divide, I think that this is one way we can do it. And so I appreciate you inviting me on and allowing me to share a little bit of perspective, not just from my own life, but my work with your listeners. I'm very grateful.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been amazing.
Thank you so much, Megan. Let's find a time to do it again.
Absolutely. Ellevate Network drives real results for ambitious women trying to break through the glass ceiling and achieve success in their careers. We offer a platform full of resources and opportunities for growth, all designed to help you unlock your potential. With Ellevate support, you can take the first step toward achieving your professional goals. With a supportive community and tangible resources at your fingertips, you're only one step away from reaching your fullest potential. Join us today and take advantage of our 30-day free trial to start building the career of your dreams. Thanks so much for listening to the Ellevate podcast. If you like what you hear, you can subscribe, give us 5 stars, and share your review. You can learn all about Ellevate membership and all the great things that Ellevate Network is doing at our website, www.ellevatenetwork.com. That's ELLEVATE network.com. And special thanks to our producer, Catherine Heller. She rocks. Thanks so much, and join us next week.